Pray, light your lantern, Master.
Turns out, the game was real after all. There were talks of it in leaks several years ago, but at the time, even if I believed it to be a real product being worked on, it was years down the line. It felt like it was just another pipe dream. Like Gigantic getting revived, and now Dragon's Dogma getting a sequel, both are actually unexpected, but welcome ones, for the most part. And while we're at it, Team Ninja just released their own ambitious open world title around this time, Rise of the Ronin. As excited as I was for that game, I don't have the other 70 bones to spare for it at the moment. So, Dragon's Dogma 2 finally releases, and the game is mixed. I suspect people complained about it mostly for the port.
Just don't crash, just make it through, no!
But not for long, it feels like. Isn't it actually strange that there was nothing being said about this game for so long? This had such a quiet development. They could just use billboards. People still read those, right? While I'm on the road, I sometimes pass by this billboard that says no one wants a hot husband, and on the back it says no one wants a hot wife with a number to dial at the bottom of it. Wait, its sequel, the game, not the billboard, was introduced to the masses with what seemed like short enough controversy, mostly concerning what is now becoming a traditional bad PC port for every modern game, along with some microtransactions. Along with those, the game also introduced some new gameplay elements, such as new vocations and a better gripping system, all around building upon what made the first game so fun, though it seemed to build upon genuinely everything, including its flaws, such as the bad voice direction
What should I do?
and its lackluster story. I'll be going into more detail regarding everything aforementioned in its own sections of the video here, but I'd first like to bring attention to these. Maybe you're looking for a stranger's opinion regarding a specific topic. If you're here for entertainment, I don't believe it'll suit your needs as much. I may not be as more focused on the delivery as I am the substance itself, if that makes sense. So feel free to use the remainder of the time, should you stick around for it, as just background noise. I just want to talk. I'll also be glancing over the story in this video, but I won't be going in depth. So this is mostly spoiler free. Hopefully you've had enough time now to decide whether you're skipping to a specific topic, or just letting this play out in the background. And speaking of, mid-2013 was when the last Dragon's Dogma game-related content would release here in the West, while Japan had gotten to see Dragon's Dogma Online with new content in late 2015. At least for a short time. Although I'm not really able to say how things looked overseas, here in the West, Dragon's Dogma left on a pretty hopeful note. Hideaki Itsuno, the lead director for titles such as Devil May Cry 2 and beyond, Resident Evil Outbreak, and of course Dragon's Dogma, stated in a Kotaku article. Is it okay to bring Kotaku up? Itsuno stated that he was hopeful to continue the game. saying an important line within the community that he and his crew were, quote, only able to use about 60 to 70% of the ideas they had for the game. There's so much they still want to do, end quote. These ideas included giving pawns quests that the other players can participate in, new types of quests, and new races. Another article remarks how there were talks of them including a moon segment, but even then he's sort of vague about it. So with talks of him being so passionate about this title and seemingly a sequel being confirmed far before the leaks even happened, what took so long? Don't get me wrong, I know these things aren't very easily made, and even less easily are they made bug-free and quickly, considering the track record for other AAA companies. I'm more than willing to wait as long as needed for a game to release in a perfectly playable, bug-free state. But the radio silence of an IP like this? It seemed like it was another treasure cursed to be in development hell. An article released in 2023, hosted by Alan Wen, talks about how he scored an interview with Itsuno himself, along with, I'm going to try my very best, Yoshiaki Hirabayashi, a Capcom producer, where they talk about the difficulties. Hirabayashi had an understanding that as long as Itsuno wasn't able to be present for Dragon Dogma 2's production, the project would remain at a halt. On top of that, team had to be gathered along with other resources required for such a big project. This was something the producers seemed to understand was a necessary, hefty investment, and didn't need to be given a half measure. Issue merely lied with time, Hirabayashi saying it was, quote, more that they needed a lot of things to fall in place, end quote. This was a project that all parties seemed to have wanted, but time constraints were the issue. Unfortunately, nothing else was expanded upon regarding its mostly silent development. Pieces eventually fell where they belonged. The dream had reached a will, and the will belonged to a now-present Itsuno. After 5 long years of work, the game releases to its mixed reception.
All it takes is a glance to acknowledge that people aren't happy about the PC release. Even though I've played it exclusively on Xbox, where I thankfully have had no issues after being able to cap the frames at 60, I'm ignoring the console reviews. Well, I can ignore the Xbox reviews because a loud majority still care about the graphics, and are also this. And PlayStation doesn't really have reviews I'm willing to ignore on their store page, because there aren't any. My personal complaints with the release of Dragon's Dogma 2 would have lied with the PC port itself, and also it's the fact it's $70. I still greatly dislike this new standard, and this is one of 2 times I've participated in it. The last $70 purchase I've made was with Elden Ring, and that was just with the deluxe bundle. Base game shouldn't be 70 bones by itself. It was hard enough to get the consoles and the pieces necessary to get a PC just capable of playing the games I wanted to. I still consider myself fortunate just for having the Series X. I guess I can't say too much. I still ended up buying Dragon's Dogma 2, didn't I? And I intend to buy the DLC whenever that hits the online shelves. On the topic of transactions, the game was definitely in the crossfire for its micros. I'll give a brief overview of these microtransactions, and I'll also explain what these items are, for those that aren't familiar with the game. 4 wake stones, sold separately, $1 each. Wake stones are items in-game that are rarely found whole, instead found most commonly as 3 separate pieces. When the 3 pieces meet, they form one whole wake stone, which can then be used to revive yourself after dying, or someone else upon death, such as a named NPC. Rift crystals, which are pretty much just the in-game currency, vary from $5 to $1 per bundle. Crystals can be used to buy accessories, new personalities for your pawn, a book that allows one to change the look of their arisen and pawn, a harpy snare smoke beacon, $1, used to bait harpies down to the ground for an easy kill, port crystal, $3. When placed mostly anywhere on the map, the player can teleport to said item using another in-game item as long as they are outside on the map itself. The list goes on for several other items. The point being, these are all items that are actually obtainable in-game. Fairy stones especially, as you farm those off of mini-bosses such as Cyclopses, Chimeras, Drakes, and Merchants. Port crystals having a max of, I believe, like 4 that you can find on the map freely. A couple are quest rewards, another one for defeating a dragon, and another for looting a griffin's nest. These transactions are obviously just there for those that are lazy. It's a very heavy-handed way of putting it, I know, but some believe these items are locked behind a very difficult and time-consuming process. If you believe just playing the game is a difficult and time-consuming process, then I feel this isn't necessarily a game you should be judging, as it's just not for you. The first game had these items scattered about in a very similar way. This is hating Call of Duty because the guns make scary noises. Or hating Diablo because in order to use the more powerful abilities, spells, armors, and the like, you have to level up. I say all this because these items that have caught backlash are part of the normal process. This isn't like Black Desert where you have to live a second life on it, just to level up your fishing skill. If your argument is like this guy, where it's predatory to have microtransactions in a $70 game, I can understand that. Like I said before, I'm not a fan of the $70 standard. I think it's lame. It's stupid. According to an article in PC Mag, there were very frequent posts pointing out one item in particular, the port crystal. They explain how this is essentially selling a convenience, which in turn makes this predatory. So, this single player game, giving the quote-unquote lazy player an option to speed things up, is predatory. I understand people have jobs and they may be willing to shed a couple of dollars on a game to sort of speed through the process. That's fine. But going out of your way to complain about these microtransactions. The game doesn't squeeze this out of you as if it were a super long and tedious grind. Look, okay? My only real question is, where was this outrage before? I'll use another game published by Capcom here, Resident Evil 2 Remake. Single player game with unlockable in-game items that are locked behind the grind. Most of these items could be unlocked in the game. Heck, some of these couldn't, as they were just outfits for the character in a single player game. There's even a specific microtransaction to unlock all the unlockables in the game. Hey, I hear some of you starter keyboards. That game wasn't full price. I guess that's fair. What about Street Fighter 6? That's a $60 game, and look at the passes for those. It's a multiplayer game, and it's putting passes behind a paywall for characters, color palettes, and avatars. I guess the avatars are separate at least, for $15 a pop, but someone starts again. Maybe the Street Fighting community isn't as popular as the Resident Evil franchise. Okay, Devil May Cry 5 had a bunch of transactions as well, selling in-game currency, taunts that were hidden behind one hell of a grind otherwise, uniforms for characters, weapon skins, more weapons, battle tracks, more currency. Resident Evil Village had an outfit paywalled, weapons charms, vouchers for the in-game shop, a bunch of other items that can be found in the game, such as ammo and weapons that can be unlocked. Resident Evil 4 Remake introduced more outfits, ammo charms, blah blah blah. I'm sure you get the point. I apologize if I come off as more preachy with the point itself, which was why this game was there a stink over the microtransactions. These issues linger just long enough for some drama channels to discuss it, or make clips of popular YouTubers mentioning it. After people seemingly did their part, they immediately just moved on instead of waiting for some sort of resolution. No research into the topic, no patience to reap what they sow, just unrest. I would have ignored this outrage as just any other if it didn't have a few of my friends dismiss the game entirely. They were told this game had stuff like basic game functions locked behind major time investments into the game, and were bound to be pressured into this easy way out if they decided to buy the game to start with. It's a shame, because I'd love to experience some of this game with them. All of its ups and its downs. Like its story. The sequel has very similar story beats as the first game, which makes sense considering it is a cycle in the game itself. This cycle, at least as far as the first game is concerned, begins when a dragon introduces itself into the world. This dragon then ventures forth to find not just a worthy opponent, but someone the dragon insists is capable of killing it, setting fire to the world in its search. This being that is chosen by the dragon is to become the Arisen, which is what our playable characters are. The dragon will then await in its area of choice for the Arisen and his party to find it, and hopefully duel it to the death. You aren't the first Arisen in this cycle. In fact, you can find the prior Arisen in the first. You can actually find several Arisen in the first game and in its sequel. They all come with their own variety of reasons as to why they may have just failed in their mission. Well, obviously, you're there, so they failed. The dragons in both games share this want for a great battle, having a whole arena dedicated to just the two parties duking it out. The dragon sounds like a pretty honorable guy, actually, at peace with the fate of being killed, accepts that other Arisen may suddenly lack the drive to fulfill their destiny, and simply moves on to find another chosen one. This attitude, and also the fact that it must be in a dragon's DNA to have badass voices.
Now choose, flee, or step forth. Mi escurate et malaga. Bereft of the cycle, naught would be born into its save chaos, great and terrible. We must fulfill our charges. I, as the dragon, and thou as the Arisen. Climb upon me.
This almost excuses how he finds the Arisen in the first place. There's some ye old politics that actually get involved in both games, each with their own pros.
The sequel has it feel more organic, with the Arisen themselves literally intended to be the ruler of the country, although it feels lacking. There's all this talk about convincing others that you're the real deal, but after all the time in the game, it doesn't really amount to anything. You just go around acting as the hero like you did in the first game. You're not representing anything aside from the reputation of the Arisen. You don't do anything kingly or queenly, like choosing a banner, commanding the guards around. It just feels like a missed opportunity. The first game had politics be involved only because the previous Arisen desired to be involved in them, which caused him to become the Duke of the Land of Granzies. The only real interesting thing about his character is, aside from the fact he is also an Arisen, is that there's numerous events foreshadowing of something going on behind the scenes. The Jester being weird in general, the tufts of hair you can find representing the fact that the Duke is stressing out. There's a couple of other things, but that's some spoilers I don't want to risk. I know it's an old game, but on the off chance, So that's the foundations for its story. A cycle of life and death that can be ended when a hero slays the dragon and brings about an era of peace. There's some filler in between the introduction of the dragon and the final battle, though. In the first game, most of these are entirely missable, such as the story of Mercedes, a woman who leads a mercenary band on behalf of her country. She struggles with other guards and even her own fighters not taking her seriously as a capable warrior, despite her efforts to help with keeping damage caused by the dragon to a minimum. Another is a witch in the deep woods named Celine, who is subject to conspiracy that she might be involved with the recent dragon attacks, despite her attempts to keep her distance away from these villages. She's targeted because of this and her withdrawn personality. She's sort of not all there. I mention this filler because this is something the director actually wanted to bring attention to in order to flesh the world out. At least, that's what it sounds like. He mentioned wanting to create a world that seemed lived in, as if it didn't just poof into existence as soon as the player characters started to take action. This was intended to be a living, breathing civilization that has existed for centuries, with men and women having their own tasks throughout the day. This remains sort of the same in the sequel. Quests you can miss entirely that would go on with or without your involvement. You can even find other parties of adventurers doing their own thing. You know what else is the same? The story feeling half-baked. In the sequel, it has the same bones as the original: political strife, evil magic doodads, conflict with the prior Arisen, the side quests. It really feels like a quantity over quality sort of thing. The sequel actually opens up with a pretty big question for those that have played the first game, or those that are just aware of the rules at play. Your Arisen starts at a willing involuntary labor camp for stoneworks and is mistaken for a pawn. A pawn in this world is exactly as their name suggests, a being that exists solely to be commanded by and eventually die for the Arisen. Otherwise, they essentially idle. They have no need for food, water, or really any other purpose. So what were they all doing willingly being commanded by this goofball? This is pretty much the main quest in the game, so it makes sense to be the most fleshed out. It has bad guys becoming good, ties into a few other quests, just to name a couple of its features. Out of everything in the game, I wish they expanded on the Arisen and the Dragon's relationship, because the first game it sort of teases this relationship being more than just destined rivals. While on the wiki for this game, I came across this quote from Mercedes where she gives her own sort of observation, her view of the relationship of the Arisen and the Dragon as they fought. She talks about how there is a sense of kinship, this respect for one another, despite both well aware of their fates ending in one or the other's demise. Each time the dragon speaks to you in both games, they do make it clear he has this respect for the Arisen. He acknowledges them as a borderline equal, but it rarely ever gets displayed. Feels more like a telling and not showing kind of thing, The closest they get to displaying respect is allowing them to chicken out of being the Arisen right before the final battle itself. They could have had the dragon maybe swoop in to help you in some way amidst one of your missions, give you a lift somewhere, maybe just eat someone, I don't know. His presence should have been around more if they wanted that kinship to play a bigger role. I would have liked to see it. A dragon companion? Hell yeah. It would have made the final fight all the more dramatic. Knowing this is a creature that has helped you on your way to becoming as strong as you could, all so that you could use your strength to fight it on equal footing. This is a creature considered to be one of the few unstoppable forces of nature in this world, and it has no malice. Not for you. It acknowledges the weight it has placed on you, and it respects you for marching up to it before you were even considered to be a chosen one. The dragon almost takes joy in his role. He doesn't just randomly find a big arena for the two of you to fight in. This was a planned battle. He looked forward to it. He's one of the only characters that's actually fleshed out. Somewhat. Maybe I just really like the voices. But if the story wasn't the main focus of the game for most, what else was there? The lore seems expansive, but just doesn't feel as thorough as, say, Dark Souls. Neighboring countries only being mentioned very briefly, Other cultures just got touched upon in the sequel with the introduction of Batal and its prominent race of Beastren. They had this dislike of pawns to perform a daily prayer. They got a whole traditional value in that area. It's a whole vibe. Maybe the enemies then. Bandits, goblins, cyclopses, chimeras, golems, griffins, drakes. Close, but no cigar. Maybe this is just me, but the music might be kind of the appeal. I'm a sucker for good music. I mean, who isn't, right? Good music is good music, no matter the genre. I catch myself choosing a lot of games nowadays entirely based off of how I feel about some of its soundtrack. I liked Undertale, but didn't care for Deltarune until I heard Big Shot. I'm not too fond of anime voice acting. You know, the thing where they like audibly gasp and crunch over the tiniest things. To each their own, but it's sort of a mood killer for me. Despite that, Nier Automata's OST pulled me right in. You get bonus points if you play the music during a moment, and it actually changes how someone can view the song. Kinda like a Jujutsu Kaisen's Season 2 opening. With that being said, Dragon's Dogma is sort of an exception to this rule of mine. This music is overall average. It feels like the typical orchestral stuff you hear in most movies and games. Again, to each their own, but I feel like music like that is used to instead make players and viewers focus on what's happening on screen. They don't want to take away from the action. It's a very safe genre to use. Now, what about the music that actually isn't just something playing in the background? It instead actively contributes to what's unfolding, such as a boss being on its last bar of health. This is a track that's become sort of renowned within the community. It's inspiring, it's consistent, it's overall an upbeat track that only appears regardless of how a battle is going. Are you struggling to kill that ogre that's surprisingly agile in that cave? No curatives, down to one other pawn, but the music tells you that you can lock in. Maybe further down the line you're finally able to travel solo and you're taking on a chimera, a malformed creature made up of the strength and agility of a lion, poisonous bites of a serpent, and the magic of a goat. You hear this music and you're not even winded. This is your theme. What's going to stop you now? Spoilers, it's Bitter Black Isle. The Bitter Black Isle is the DLC area that is responsible for the Dark Arisen being added onto the Dragon's Dogma title. Comes with its own new weapons, armor, enemies, story, and of course, music. The music for this area is unlike the rest of the game because it reacts to your current fighting chances, and also sounds like this. It sounds more like a horror game, doesn't it? At least compared to what I played earlier. None of these sound like something for a heroic quest. It's as if you're fighting out of your depth. You're plunging your head into water and you need to come up for breaths of air. Otherwise, this ocean will catch you with a wave and bring you down into it. The Isle is a video in itself. You can find plenty discussing its lore on YouTube here. And I intended to explain why I wish the sequel followed a similar path as the DLC for the first game. As in, I wanted to hear the music react to your situation, overwhelming odds, intense unnerving strings. A fight with only slightly uneven in the enemy's favor, distorted strings. Death? Coffin music. But apparently, Capcom actually did that. I was looking at the OST for the sequel, and there are different versions for different phases of the battles. I'll use the Armored Cyclops theme as an example. You have the normal theme, Rage, and Fatigue. You hear the strings play out in the background, right? I won't tease you. I'll play the specific parts that are different. Around the 35-second mark is when the difference is most noticeable. The normal has these strings and horns blaring, then Rage adds a choir to it all. Then Fatigue takes the brass and the choir away, leaving only the steady tempo of the strings. You could probably guess by the names of these tracks that these indicate the state of the enemy. Normal is generic combat, Rage is when you enrage the opponent and send them to a frenzy, and Fatigue is what happens after the frenzy ends. Pretty cool, right? I just wish it was more noticeable. So, if the music wasn't your interest in the game, what else could it have been? Well, I'm sure a lot of people put it together by now. The appeal was in the gameplay. It's encouraged to play through each of them. Starting with the basics, we have fighters. Using a shield along with a one-handed weapon, their ability to block now doubles as a chance to parry when timed correctly. When their enemies are knocked off balance, they have the opportunity to pull off an execution. Satisfying. Aggro-oriented, acting as damage and tank. Thieves. Dual-wielding daggers and being surprisingly squishy, they use bursts of speed to stagger and parry their enemies to, in turn, pull off their own executions. There's even an ability entirely focused on parrying and attacking getting some damage in. Very useful to have as they can throw a grappling hook to enemies to stagger or pull them to you, ideally used with harpies. They also have a skill that steadily drains their stamina, their trade-off being it allows them to, essentially, Ultra Instinct their way out of damage. Damage-oriented because of its moveset, also super fancy to use. Archer. Although stuck with a bow, they also use another weapon when confronted up close, their legs. Their strength still lies in the variety of arrows you can find. Explosives, arrows soaked in tar or water, or poison. They're intended as support, and nothing supports the team more than using the fittingly named Unmaking Arrow. It's a one-shot. It's a one-shot arrow. Use it wisely, as the game auto-saves as soon as the arrow is launched. And Mage. Focused as a healer, making it a class considered to be essential in most parties when starting the game. They cast buffs, debuffs, light for the dark paths ahead, and healing. I personally don't find it very fun to play, but I still like using it for the outfits. It's just my bias for witch hats. They're really interesting to me. Like, you can look at a hat and realize it's a witch hat based off the brim and its crown, but it doesn't always have to be cartoony. They can come in such a variety.
Ever since they were introduced to me in Berserk or maybe Dark Souls, so I just can't help but find them so cute and attention-grabbing.
Its circular brim,
the tip of the hat, the potential for little add-ons and history for it is the fact you can look at a hat's brim and the top of it, and despite the variety of colors, textures, and even like the cosmetic things like a buckle,
you can look at it and still notice it's a witch
hat. The crowns can be jagged, some can have a... Hello?
Hey. Although these classes have crowds of their own to appeal to, the masses might be interested in the hybrid classes, which as of right now, there are 6, and these are exclusive to the player themselves. Magic Archer. Sort of like Mage with its variety of buffs and debuffs to shoot, capable of even healing, capable of inflicting sleep, fire, ice, lightning, and a skill that shreds through whatever is unfortunate enough to be within your line of sight. Jack of all trades with its ability to heal, tank damage, cast buffs and debuffs, and deal damage. Also, a very flashy class. Sorcerer, a magic wielder whose magical skeleton key is Meteoron. Rubble in a cave blocking your path? I cast Meteoron. Oh no, an ogre is eating my pawn. I cast Meteoron. I'm fighting an enemy in a very enclosed space, where my meteors can't reach them. I cast Maelstrom, ragdolling them outside, where I then cast Meteoron. They also apparently have other spells. Damage-oriented class. Trickster, one of the new vocations. Using a censer, one of these incense-looking things, these class casts illusions on the battlefield. Unfortunately, that's where their use begins and ends for the most part. They can cast a dragon mid-roar to stun or scare opponents, have an illusion of themselves act as a decoy that attracts attention from all their enemies so that your pawns can charge up their own attacks. You can even cause enemies to start targeting each other. There's one other move that directly involves the pawns, and that's to sap their health while increasing their damage. I'm inclined to call this a crowd control sort of class, but I watched a video recently that insists it's like a tank, but it feels more experimental, which isn't something I'm harking on, by the way. I'm really happy to see something new. I dislike the class because it's impractical, not because something new was attempted here. I want to see more. I want to see the devs try their hand at either improving this or making something else completely new. There's a lot of saturation in the market today, so this is a little refreshing. Support-oriented update. I was enlightened by watching a few videos over Trickster and now understand its role. Genuine veteran vocation. This class is intended for those that know the skills in and out and have a deeper idea of how to play the game that isn't just mash button to kill. You aggro enemies and let your pawns do the damage. You stun enemies, bait them into environmental kills. You learn how and when to grapple enemies to further aid your pawns. This is a genuine support role, as you will do none of the killing yourself. Technically, you don't. Your pawns do it at your request. Warrior. Big person, swing big weapon. Easily comparable to the greatsword from Monster Hunter, where you strike a pose that charges your strength, inch your way to an enemy, or wait for the enemy to just so happen to land in front of you, then lights out. The ability to parry is still present here, but should you miss the opening, the class just lets you eat the hit and finish swinging your weapon. You can swing it once or a lot. Tank oriented, but can also do some damage when hitting the vitals of an enemy. Mystic Spearhand. One of the wildest and most fancy classes I've ever seen introduced to a game. Introduced primarily to hunt dragons, at least lore-wise, they operate as a mix between fighter and mage. They can cast a shield upon themselves and their allies, shred enemies with their twin blade, and their most important ability is to stun enemies in place. You charge the spell, which doesn't restrict your movement in the slightest as you do so, and cast it upon the enemy of your choice. No matter its size, it will become locked in place. While you and your pawns wail on it, you can begin charging it again to stun the enemy once more just as the initial spell wears off. Rinse and repeat. Damage and support oriented. Warfare. The class that has more potential that I'm not smart enough to realize. This class allows you to mix and match weapons and their skills across all previous vocations, introducing only 3 new elements. A skill that lets you switch between weapons at the press of a button, along with 2 passives. Skills using less stamina, and the other being that weight affects your speed less. Jack of all trades, master of all. Before you finally reach the high that is these classes, you'll start out, naturally, at a low level. Goblins are a worthy threat, wolves hunt in packs, and you and your party watch in horror as a harpy destroys your lifts, realizing that maybe you should have had at least one ranged vocation to kill them before they could do so. While you're leveling up and progressing through the beginning of the game, the survival aspect introduced in the sequel takes the forefront. Your party should carry a camping pack so that along their travels they can find a campfire and rest to refill their health to the max. Your max health is steadily chiseled down as you take damage, so sleeping at an inn or camping becomes ideal, before and after adventuring into caves and dungeons. Should you decide to not camp and wait for an inn, you can reach most towns that have one by hitching a ride on an ox cart. These are usually really cheap, pretty common to come across, so they're a safe alternative to using a fairy stone. Most of the time. That covers pretty much everything in the main game, aside from the story itself. I won't spoil too much else on the off chance someone here is interested in it. I considered going over spoilers, but I figured it wasn't really worth a section, mainly because this video is becoming a bit too bloated. So there's lackluster story, decent amount of enemies, plenty of ways to play. What's waiting for you beyond all this, past the main game? DLC isn't here yet, but seems to be a real talking point, so maybe we'll get something such as a Dark Arisen cut with the sequel, as in, something in-game for players who are still invested with the game. I personally have a very low standard for what I would like to see, which is just anything else the original writers and directors wanted to throw in the game in the first place, but just didn't have the time. The moon being a level, even more races, the other 30% of stuff that wasn't implemented in the first game. But if I had to be more specific as well as ambitious, I would want to see a couple more vocations. I really want a brawler sort of class. I just want to suplex goblins to the earth's core. Or maybe something like the Bone Fist from Dark Souls 2. Every single swing makes the wind whistle. You stomp a foot and it breaks the ground beneath you. It'd be such a power trip. Maybe introduce another vocation that's not meant to be at the forefront. Maybe something that uses runes. Mark the ground with some sort of elemental that when an enemy walks into it, they burst into flame, or a shockwave sends them back. Mark yourself so that you can channel the Arisen's counterpart, the dragon, and have a big mirage of claws swipe at the enemies. The head of the dragon sweeping across an area in front of you to set fire to it all. Or a tail swipe. Ooh, maybe like a bard class. There are already animations in the game for characters to play instruments. Just slap those on the Arisen and have them force the enemies to dance until they get struck. Have the enemies into a frenzy, where they fight everything they see, including each other, with an increased attack rate. Hello? I'm just spitballing. I still definitely want to see a fist-focused class, though. So, if not another vocation, maybe the previous game's post-dragon or in-game effect could be placed back in. Specifically have a massive crater from somewhere on the map with all those ledges to grab onto again, and just let a level designer go nuts with the dungeons. It feels like a cop-out for keeping the story to a minimum, but I feel like the people will easily look past it if they notice the focus on gameplay. Definitely leaves plenty of room for nonsensical placement to actually make sense, such as having a dungeon that leads into the Earth's smoldering core being right above the dungeon that leads to a big space dragon having to be fought on the moon. There's also the usual stuff that comes with the DLCs. I'd like there to be a few more options of armor and weapons. There's a lot of cool stuff in the game already, but I'd always love to see more. Regardless, it's way too early to say which direction they might go with the DLC. I'll personally be watching regardless of their decision, whenever it might come out. Dragon's Dogma 2 is a sequel that was open about its existence, but very quiet about its progress. Just about everyone who had experienced the first game may not be guaranteed to enjoy it, but definitely will recognize it by one of its unique features. There aren't any games like it, at least in regards to the gameplay. The classes, the concept of bonds, the Arisen and the Dragon along with their cycle, the strange voice direction, its lackluster main story, all of this combines into a very memorable experience. For me, the sequel had delivered all of this and more, keeping similar flaws, yet building upon what made the first game such a cult hit in the first place. Thanks, Dragon's Dogma 2, for just finally coming out. Closing remarks. Sorry if this was a major info dump to those watching and listening. I'm not too sure what others might think of everything said, as in, they might not be engaged in the slightest because everything I mentioned was just really boring. Especially the Capcom segment in the beginning. I like talking about this stuff. I didn't force myself to or anything, but I know people may not view information as lightly if it's not at least a little entertaining. I had a segment like that because I just seen people talk about the whole release thing so much, and I sort of got invested in the topic itself. Like, there was this controversy going around that the developer for Dragon's Dogma 2, or like the lead director, was being held back by Capcom intentionally, and he threatened to leave, but that's already been rebuked. Like, it's confirmed that that wasn't the case. So I wanted to share what I found for those that were interested, but didn't give themselves the time to research it. I also wanted to discuss the music, but I don't think I have enough of an opinion to dedicate like a big segment to that either. I guess I was more focused on speedrunning the information out of the way and was afraid of putting any more funny edits, just in case it dragged on too long, which sort of sums up my attitude towards this video. I enjoyed making it, but I wanted to make it as brief as I could. Brief. Yeah. Thanks for stopping by.